welcome everyone. So, if you missed it, today was the big day in which ArenaNet sat down and talked to us at long last about challenging group content. Sort of. I mean, they announced a lot of stuff, sure, but they didn't really talk to us very much about this new challenging group content. They just gave us a little bit of an overview, and then gave us a whole bunch of other announcements too, like the launch of a couple of new websites, the reveal of Guild Wars 2 going free to play. If you missed me discussing that topic, there will be a link in the description. This is the other video I managed to put out today, in which we talked about how major that is going to be for the game. And in this video, I'm going to talk specifically about the raids. So yeah, challenging group content are going to be raids. They're not doing like a weird twist on raids. We know that ArenaNet is a company that's very proud of changing typical MMO conventions and trying to do their own take on it. Well, they are for raids as well, but they're being honest with us that these are straight up raids like we find in other games. This is their solution to difficult group content for people after they hit level 80. Something this game has been sorely lacking for a long time. So again, just to go a little over the announcement itself, this took place at PAX Prime. They hired out one of the best stages they could. They hired out a prime hour for doing their discussion, and they went so far too as to give us an announcement in-game. Everyone playing, I was in PvP at the time, a message comes up at the top saying, hey, it's gonna be live in a second, you know, letting people know. We had about 20,000 viewers on Twitch. The room, the audience that Colin Johansson was giving his discussion to about these raids was over capacity. Supposedly there were some pictures on Twitter of the immense queues to get in there, and a few things beyond raids were announced as well. And so in fact what I'm going to do with this video is talk to you guys about that stuff first. I will give you a timestamp on screen right now to skip to if you want to get straight to the raids, but there is a substantial amount of alternate things I do want to go over. For example, we are only getting 2 more beta weekend events. We're getting this next one coming up, and then 1 more after that. This is exciting on the one hand because we know that release is coming very close. It's kind of sad on the other, though, for the rangers and engineers out there, or generally everyone, if you care about the balance of the game, because the devs aren't going to get really decent time to have great feedback on their implementation of those 2 elite specializations. Something tells me that perhaps they may have originally, as idealists, wanted all of them done by this point, but maybe that's just me reaching there a little. So they confirmed that. A great many other confirmations came by the way of a new website ArenaNet have released, specifically for Heart of Thorns. So that's what you can see here. Let me scroll up and go to the homepage. This allows you to look at each of the core features of the expansion, since now that they've talked about raids, they have all been established, and as they try and explain here, journey deeper. So this has actually got some fairly telling things about the expansion that haven't been explicit to us about before, and even some cool art. Colin himself, during the presentation, did a bit of a recap on things that we've talked about before. So, for example, the Fractals of the Mist changes on the website. If we scroll along for long enough, eventually we will get to Fractals of the Mist. So fractal dungeons, as they call them here. I'll talk about that more in a second. They have a page specifically on PvP, World versus World, guild halls. He explained that PvP leagues were coming in the game along with a free-to-play change. But one fun thing is when you look at the Elite Specializations page here, you'll actually notice what they've done is the same thing as the launch of the game, where they had this image, you can see, where all of the professions were slowly being revealed to us, and they're all stood in a big group together. Well, this here are those same characters. I've mentioned this in a video before, and now that we've got a lot of the elite specializations, we can see a lot of this art in place. Check it out. So you've got the Reaper down here, the Tempest, the Berserker, the Chronomancer, the Dragon Hunter, the Herald, the Daredevil over here. Herald's been dropped in. But interestingly, we've got 2 more specializations too. One of them's here, who would be the Druid, right, in theory, or the Forge, and then the other one is on the site here somewhere else too. So that's pretty interesting, and so people have even gone so far as to pull this information out and speculate what it could possibly be. Though obviously it's just a blob and we can't tell right now. It gets more major though when we look at the PvE jungle region section, and this isn't necessarily good news. I'm not going to linger on this video. We're going to get to the raid discussion very soon. But you will see it was announced here in some of this information. They do at last confirm that we're going to travel through 4 maps. 4 new PvE maps was the data mining number, and it absolutely seems to be what Heart of Thorns is. There's a lot of discussion to do on that specifically. I am kind of sad about that. And they even give a list here as well as we go through of like all the things that you'll be able to earn and what there is to do. So they kind of list Saurians as one of the core races in the jungle, which we hadn't heard of much before. We knew there were dinosaurs, obviously, but they're kind of, you know, listing them among some of the other big shots like the Nuhawk and the Itzel and the Exalted and so forth. They say specifically we're going to get 2 new armor sets across all 4 maps, just 2 armor sets. 5 new weapon sets available, and then in addition to that there will be 60 new unique skins on top that we can earn, as well as minis and more, you know, miscellaneous fun items like that. Then in addition to that there's going to be 3 legendaries at the launch of Heart of Thorns, which will be added to as time goes along. That's legendary weapons specifically, not the back piece. You're going to get precursors for those legendaries, of course, and then 13 original precursors too. And that's kind of, you know, in terms of things to go for and places to explore, that encapsulates the expansion. Though, there is a new legendary that was announced today, and that is with raids, and that is legendary armor. That's your reward for doing the raids. Colin didn't really talk too well about it on stage. This was something we really had to go onto the website for, so here as I navigate over. And it does explicitly say legendary armor is not giving you a statistical edge as we would expect. This is armor that you can freely swap the stats on however you like. This is crazy. Legendary armor has to be really difficult to get. Now, there's going to be 6 pieces to finish your entire set, yes. But once you get to that point, it doesn't matter how many new stat sets ArenaNet add to the game. It doesn't matter what builds you attempt to use outside of your trinkets, which in general are easier to get anyway. You will be able to swap really easily between tons of different builds, and any gold you earn from that point forward is going in your pocket and is going on skins and going on cosmetics. It removes like a huge gold sink from the game. It stops people crafting a ton of stuff. So I am expecting this to be insanely hard to get. And not only monetarily do I expect it to be insanely hard to get, I am hoping then that the raids will also be very exclusive in who can complete them. One thing many of us in the community have been concerned about, Guild Wars 2 has always been a game that's been very open. Like, they kind of say, if you're playing the game, we'll let everybody try everything, and they tend to make things really easy. But I have always been an advocate, and I've always been on the side of the argument that to have really, truly difficult content and awesome rewards, it needs to be so hard that only a small fraction of people will be able to complete it. And whether ArenaNet would live up to that or make them too easy has always been in question for me. But hearing that legendary armor is tied to raids does give me a little bit more of that assurance, because they are not going to flippantly try and give people legendary armor. Once they have it, that's like a huge thing. That's a big cutoff, and suddenly you remove those people from participating in a lot of like crafting systems and stuff like that in the game. So hopefully that's a good sign. I think that's one of the most exciting thing that they could have announced as the reward for raids. I wouldn't even have predicted they'd give us this. I would have thought legendary armor would be far off in the future. And yeah, that means Heart of Thorns is releasing new legendary weapons, new legendary back pieces through fractals and PvP, and legendary armor. Pretty fantastic. Before we move on and talk more about the raids themselves, one final thing that this website did reveal to us is this. So this is some background art from one of the pages that people have managed to pull, and you can see in the background. I think it's the first thing you see. And, yeah, it shows a giant friggin' tidal wave with a poor boat down here sweeping up. This is some of the most beautiful concept art I've ever seen them make, right? Coming for Lion's Arch. Presumably the newly built, newly fortified Lion's Arch. It's funny, the lion statue we see here, the lion statues aren't actually in-game anymore, so that's a bit of a shame. And, of course, the feature of the friggin' art, this giant 3-headed beast. What I'm guessing is some kind of a sea Hydra. So there's quite a lot to talk about with this specifically. Whether this is tied to raids, let me be clear, I am doubtful. It could have something to do with the story late game in Heart of Thorns. Could be something to do with the setup once Heart of Thorns is over, what happens next. I don't believe this is depicting, basically, the tidal wave that hit Lion's Arch with Zaitan and some kind of great beast that was there and we'd never heard about in the books and so forth. No, I think this is another tidal wave coming for Lion's Arch. What I think would be an interesting twist on this, if this is actually going to be part of the story, yes, it may be setting up that we're going towards the Deep Sea Dragon. I doubt we're seeing the Deep Sea Dragon himself. This is probably some high-ranking minion. I like the idea, at least, that it's some high-ranking minion. Don't forget that one of the earliest trailers for Guild Wars 2 did show us an underwater sea monster we've never actually been able to fight in the game. But I like the idea that maybe this is some kind of breed of Hydra. Hydras, for what it's worth, do exist in this franchise. They are in the lore. The first game, you could most commonly find them in the Crystal Deserts, and even some like very remote specific areas of Ascalon, where of course they do not exist any longer. Like near the Wayfarer foothills and Diessa Plateau used to be a whole ton of Hydra in these really cool warped areas that just don't exist basically anymore. So Hydras are in the franchise. They were never this damn big or badass looking. They were always a lot more derpy looking. But specifically with the idea of Lion's Arch being attacked, a lot of us are going to be thinking, damn, Lion's Arch just got rebuilt. Come on, ArenaNet, don't have it be attacked again. This is like the 5th attack, okay? If you go back to Guild Wars 1, and like there were 2 attacks back there in that game as well, it's getting a bit ridiculous. But what I think they're going to do here, and I actually think will be really badass, and I was speculating on before this arc came out, is the idea that Lion's Arch is going to get attacked by a serious threat. Something rears its head, something to do with the deep sea dragon that puts that extra threat, that extra pressure. Currently, we're kind of trivializing the existence of Elder Dragons because they just seem to be waiting around doing nothing. One cool thing Heart of Thorns could push in the story is not just the idea that Morgemoth is a huge threat, but bring us back to that idea again that we had maybe pre-launch, that multiple dragons are doing things all at once and we are being pressured from all sides. And so what might be really fun to do at the start of Heart of Thorns for the plot is have so much focus on Morgemoth, and of course that's the main goal, but somewhere, really early on, out of the blue, there's a huge attack on Lion's Arch, and it's demonstrated that there's activity from the other Elder Dragons. Things are really getting quite dire. So either this will be happening at the end of Heart of Thorns, or it might be cool to have it happen early. But here's the thing that I'd love to see. I don't want to see Lion's Arch get destroyed. I want to see some dangerous, horrible, scary thing come from the deep, demonstrate that the deep sea dragon is active and doing stuff, but because of these crazy consortium-based upgrades, Lion's Arch stands firm, and Lion's Arch really proves it is a force to be reckoned with, and they just wipe away whatever this threat is. They shrug off the damage from the tidal wave, and we're left thinking, Christ, the guys in Lion's Arch are pretty badass. And then what that does is first gives us a lot of respect for the new state of Lion's Arch, but second means that inevitably, when something goes down in Lion's Arch, like Morgemoth coming at it at the very end of the game, we have 2 established strengths. And that makes the fight much more exciting. So for the long plan, I think that's a really cool thing that the devs could set up and make Lion's Arch people feel super badass. It also can serve as a perfect catalyst for more story with Evan Nashblade, with Ellen Keel and so forth, which have simmered down a little. And wouldn't it be a lot more exciting to see these guys vie for political power and all that juicy stuff when we know that the place they're vying over has demonstrated its strengths? So yeah, that's that art, that's the story stuff. I think it's pretty interesting. So let's move back over to Colin and the raid discussion. Now, I'll give you guys some quotes from Colin that stood out to me. They were described as the ultimate instanced challenge. I think that's exactly what we were hoping for. It was said that raids will be using dynamic events to build their content, and specifically that the dynamic events can address some of the linearity you tend to find in other raiding systems and other games. I found that really interesting that Colin said that, but didn't linger at it very long and moved very fast, because actually pre-launch in Guild Wars 2, this comment, this idea that they'd use dynamic events to mix things up and make things always feel different, was exactly what they were going for with dungeons. Dungeons originally supposed to be the challenging group content. I feel like I really would have enjoyed this raid reveal if ArenaNet had been candid about the state of dungeons, about their original attempts to do basically exactly what they're trying again to do in Heart of Thorns, and I would have enjoyed hearing them say, you know, we tried the dungeon situation, but we didn't understand enough of how our game worked, we didn't understand what would be so strong, and we now have this knowledge and this information and we're taking it forward. The idea of dungeons were just kind of swept under the rug. Hell, look on the main website. They describe raids as being a part of Guild Wars 2's endgame, as well as fractal dungeons. Like, they're trying to shoehorn the word dungeons onto fractals concept, and it just seems like dungeons are completely being left in the dust in favor of totally new things. And if that's what they want to do, if they have good reason for that, then that's fine, but I just would have liked a bit of candor when it comes to that. And specifically, a lot of this talk is ArenaNet saying to us what we want to do and what we want to hear, but they don't say how they're going to do it, really. They give us a lot of marketing stuff, like, we don't want to do raids the same as other games. When you think of raids in other games, you think of a screen full of UI stuff. But we're not going to do that, where you're going to be actively moving and seeing the world visually. And that's true, and I actually believe that they'll do fairly well with that, but that's kind of standard fare for Guild Wars 2. It doesn't actually tell us anything much about the way raids themselves are going to work. There are a few nuggets in there. Colin specifically said that raids are where all the great things about Guild Wars 2's combat system comes together, namely control, support, and damage. And so this is another big thing I really wanted them to touch on, how they were going to encourage players to assist one another and synergize together, building a team comp that works as a whole group rather than feeling like you're DPSing and accidentally pushing might out to people around you, or accidentally or incidentally supporting one another, or incidentally controlling enemies. None of that was really established. They did mention, you know, the idea of the soft trinity. They still believe in it, the control, the support, and the damage. But they don't talk about how they are incentivizing control. Control is in fact mentioned again. Colin described a boss fight in which a big nuke comes. We really didn't get much information, guys. A big nuke, it expands, you run away, and then you return as fast as possible. And he said when you return, it's kind of like a burn phase, and you get this opportunity to do as much damage and control as possible. So he says that you need control. He says that that's something they're trying to factor into design. But we just have to take their word for it that control will now have a larger place, right? More so than it currently does, as in Strip Defy and Ice Block or something. That's something I was very much disappointed about. I wanted to hear tangible examples about what they were going to do to address commonly used tactics, incentivize new tactics, and perhaps more engaging gameplay that takes advantage of more of the systems that are in Guild Wars 2, like being more movement-based rather than aiming to stick together as close as possible for, 70 to 80% of the time. One thing I rather did enjoy was hearing him talk about the Guild Wars 1 elite content. He specifically said, in the first game when I beat the Underworld, the Fissure of Woe, Domain of Anguish, Deep, Ergos, he mentioned all of them. Pretty much everything was covered except the Eye of the North dungeons, right? He said, it was a big deal when I managed to do these things, and we want that feeling to be back with these raids. That's great! That's exactly what I want too! I always think of Ergo's Warren when I'm thinking of how they could do raids in this game. But you can't just say that you want that. How are you doing it? Are these going to be as risky? Are they going to be? Is the content going to be as long as those systems were? Is it going to be accessible as those systems were? Are we going to be actually concerned for ourselves when we're firing on the raid, or does it not matter? They never expressed anything about risk or how they're going to implement difficulty, just that supposedly it would be there. Curiously, at one point in the trailer, or some screenshots, you can see there's like an arrow which shows the direction a mob is facing. And we do know that they have this additional AI stuff, so I have some confidence something is going on. It's just I wanted to hear that be discussed. The next thing I want to touch on is the idea of an attunement process. So for those of you who are pure Guild Wars 2 people and aren't really familiar with this idea, in a lot of MMOs, when you take this kind of raiding instance endgame idea, they require you to do like attunement, which would be a long series of quests or tasks or objectives that you have to complete in order to even gain access to that dungeon. They're saying that's not there for Guild Wars 2. And it's for a great reason. It's because they don't want people to have to spend so much time waiting around to find their group, people who are eligible to do the dungeon or the raid, and then be able to go in and play it. Specifically, this was mentioned as well with their profession design. This idea, again, that there will be these 3 roles: control, support, damage, and they're all going to be necessary, hopefully. But any profession can fill those roles, and this facilitates easier grouping. It's the same idea with the attunement process. They don't want to have that in place, but I do think it's a little bit of a cheaty comment to make, considering raids, they explicitly tell us, tie into the mastery system. This is absolutely going to be a situation like they talk about gliding here. You'll be gliding in the raids. That could very much mean that you can't do the raid unless you max out your gliding. I personally, as a player, I'm not worried about that. I think that's cool, and I like the exclusivity there, and I like that people have to work and max out a ton of masteries to be able to get through this content just fine. But they can't have the masteries in there, to me, and tie it heavily into raids, and then also tell us, oh, we don't have attunements, so we're different to regular MMOs. This is how we break conventions. No. You basically do have this system. It's just in your masteries. We did actually get a trailer of the raids. It wasn't very long. It didn't have too many shots, but I would take you guys through some of the interesting stuff. Again, this brings me on to something I'm thoroughly thrilled about, and that is lore-based things. So this raid seems to be, first of all, I would say somewhere near Verdant Brink, because on one of these shots in this trailer, we are absolutely seeing one of the crashed packed airships. we've just heard that there's only 4 maps in Heart of Thorns, okay? I would like to believe that not across all 4 maps in Heart of Thorns the packed ships have been crashed. We have heard before that it seems like more of a Verdant Brinky thing. So I think this raid will be located somewhere near there, you know, these kind of more generic jungly areas that we're seeing. And more specifically, also, very quickly in the trailer, we see a big landmark, some kind of giant platform with glowing glyphs and inscriptions and magical nonsense going on it. Guys, I think we're seeing the Bloodstone in this raid trailer. Look at that. This is fantastic. So if you guys don't know what the Bloodstone is, to keep it very brief, with the previous Elder Dragon Rising, the previous races attempted to store away and hide their magic from the Elder Dragon so they wouldn't consume it all on Tyria, and perhaps this could provide some sustenance and protect that magic that they held so dearly. So they pulled it all together and they hid it in the Bloodstone, which was then later split into 5, thrown in a volcano, and then erupted out here in the Maguma jungle. The location of the Bloodstone is very close to, but not exactly on, Verdant Brink. So I think this raid is going to be located exactly there. And what's really thrilling about this is not only do we have the Bloodstone, but we have some mysterious structures being shown on top of it too. Why is this cool? Well, because in Guild Wars 1, when we traveled to this exact location, we realized that the Masat had been manipulating its powers to charge what they called soul batteries. What they would do is kill people over the Bloodstone. The souls of those slain would get absorbed into these mysterious structures, these soul batteries, and then the Masat would take the soul batteries to power this immense gate they had that was holding shut a rip between Tyria and another dimension in the mist, the domain of anguish. So the Masat had this task to keep their race alive, to keep monsters in this other dimension away. They were constantly killing people on the Bloodstone, filling their soul batteries, and then shipping them away to the Ring of Fire Islands. And what do we see here? Weird structures on the Bloodstone again. And what do we have in Heart of Thorns? Very likely a lot of Masat influence. So, are they soul batteries? I suppose there's a chance they're not. They do look very different, I'll be honest. They look quite like, you know, Crate Obelisk shards. And maybe it's not a coincidence that that was a bit of a story and they did some setups for that during Season 1 of The Living World. I'm thrilled to see this stuff here, and I'm really happy that one of my favorite locations of the entire jungle, you know, one of the most important locations of the jungle, is going to be the location of one of the raids. That is fantastic to see. And if I'm right that this is the Bloodstone, perhaps it's also then not a coincidence we're seeing these weird fellows, these construct guys that look just like the Anomaly, this mysterious, dimensional, odd creature we fought during the Thormanova reactor disaster, when we witnessed that in the fractals set off by Scarlet Briar. Another location of intense magic energy all being, you know, coalesced and being messed around with. Well, once again, we've got a similar setup with the Bloodstone, and we have more of these like anomaly creatures, even varied colors of them, it seems. We could finally get some explanation about what that anomaly was. And this is great because these are setups right through Season 1 of The Living World, Season 2 of The Living World, that may be getting a payoff right here in Heart of Thorns. Last thing to touch on from the trailer is the boss that they're fighting. The boss actually doesn't look particularly Morgemothy to me. The boss actually looks more Zaitan influenced. And in particular, it looks kind of like a young dragon to me. I wonder, considering we have Glint and her child and the idea that her child could eventually become an Elder Dragon, what if we had some kind of a similar situation for Zaitan? Perhaps this is a baby dragon of Zaitans who went to the Bloodstone to feed on its magic and grow quickly, and now it's our job to slay it. Yeah, sure, it could be associated with Morgemoth, just given the way it looks, the multiple little things coming out of its mouth, the kind of plague-like animation when it stomps down and its green stuff coming out everywhere. I really think that could be the story. I think this could be like a replacement Zaitan we hear about, and we're like, oh, damn, it's feeding on the Bloodstone. Let's go deal with it. And that's like, almost a bit of a side story, perhaps, to the primary plot of Heart of Thorns and the location of our first raid. The end of the trailer shows something that would seem fairly random. It's a woman with a flamethrower shooting off towards the camera, and that I guess you could assume would be a player. But actually, ArenaNet did throw out a blog post on their website which mentioned that the first wing of the raids will have 3 bosses, and this presumably would be one of those. As far as I can tell as well, for what it's worth, guys, that blog post doesn't really have any other good new information in it at all. If I'm wrong, leave a comment and let me know. So, back to more specifics about the raids will work. I would have expected myself to mention this earlier in the video. You're 25 minutes into a video about the raid announcement, and I haven't said it yet. They are 10-man! The fact it's 10-man will change things slightly. I think 10-man is a great number for them to have chosen. I think 8 or 10-man would have been fine for me. I really don't want to see more than 10-man raids. It takes a long time to get all those people in the instances. It becomes harder for the devs to test that content, not just because they themselves need more people to test it, but also because when you have 10 people, things get a lot more extreme. You can be far more defensive, or you can be far more offensive, depending on how you spec those, like 15 people instead of 10. So 10's a great number. It also, in terms of actual content, if people are spread out a bit, with 10 guys on the screen, it's still fairly readable and not like massive Zerg, horrible, what the hell am I looking at? Guild Wars 2's just become an ugly light show. So 10's a pretty nice number. Even though they haven't demonstrated an understanding of how the soft trinity will really work and how they're going to realize it and how they're going to encourage us to use so much underused stuff in PvE at this point already, they do say that they don't want the challenge to be diminished over time. This is also a wonderful thing to hear. I like the thought that a difficult raid today is a difficult raid in 2017, 2018, and going forward. That means that in those later years, new people that come to the game really do have a whole ton of stuff to play, unlike in other MMOs where, you know, a raid's only relevant for a little while, and then people will very quickly slap through it, you know, just 5-man, or it doesn't feel like an accomplishment when you finish it later on. So I do like that they want to preserve that challenge for a long time. But again, how are they going to do that? People are going to practice it. People are going to get good at it. That's fine. But ArenaNet also do have a track record of just simply making stuff far too easy through a lack of foresight and a lack of caring. Tequatl was in a really good, well-balanced state when it was first released, but it quickly got nerfed. Same with the Triple Trouble Worm. Same with pretty much everything in their open world. When they introduced ferocity to the game, they made things much easier without any indication that they were ever going to go back and address those issues. Then there's the topic of power creep, which I'm sure they don't want to continue introducing, but certainly was a big factor when the elite specializations came into the game. Though maybe you can make the argument that this is why it was so important these came out before Heart of Thorns. Specifically, they do say as well that with Heart of Thorns, we'll get one raid, and that raid is going to be released in multiple wings over time. And so we'll get the first wing very shortly after the release of Heart of Thorns, and what they're going to do is use that time on that first wing to assess balance concerns and assess how their elite specializations work and encourage hopefully a healthy balance of control support and damage being used and a healthy balance of all professions being able to provide those things. This idea of 3 wings and slowly staggering them might be something that disappoints you guys, but it's a good thing, and I'll tell you why. It's a good thing because what we don't want is everyone to buy Heart of Thorns, play it on release day, go through a measly 4 maps and what is potentially going to be a very short personal story, which I desperately hope it's not, and then realize, oh, there's nothing to do. The fact that the first wing is coming out just a couple of weeks after, not even a whole month, just a couple of weeks after release, it means those hardcore guys that rush through everything, or those fickle guys that are, you know, a bit flimsy and they might disappear very fast, they have that assurance straight away that live new content is coming soon. This is also good because it means, of course, that you can spend those first 2 weeks getting your masteries. That's telling about something else as well, by the way. It means they're kind of expecting us to get a lot of our masteries done in just a 2-week period, perhaps. And masteries really aren't as long-term either as I was hoping they would be in this expansion. But again, that's perhaps me reaching a little. And then once you have complete the first wing and you're satisfied with it and you're happy how it was, you're looking forward to the next wing, and the next wing will come pretty soon too. And then you're looking forward to the next wing, and then perhaps after that, we're getting Living World Season 3. Like, you know, it's a natural progression. It's an easy way for them to roll on, to always have their player base knowing something else is coming up. Living World Season 3 would introduce a new map, and that new map would lead us to another raid, and so on. So that's raids, guys. That's what we heard. That's it in a nutshell. I guess you can tell from my tone that I am a little disappointed we didn't get many specifics. I like what ArenaNet are trying to do, or what they tell us that they're trying to do. I didn't get any more confidence from this show, though, that they understand the way their game works and that they'll genuinely be able to realize their goals. There was no word whatsoever of build locking. Build locking is something I think is truly essential for this game type to really shine, and it doesn't even seem to be on their radar. That's pretty depressing. As for Ascended Armor, I think it's fantastic. I hope it truly is difficult to get. We might see something like, it's like, you know, the first raid gives us the helmet. The second raid gives us the gloves. The third raid gives us the legs and so on. And that would really stagger it out over a long period of time. And I can see that being a pretty likely possibility. Especially considering how much art and stuff they've got to do for the sets too. There you go, guys. I'd love to hear what you think. This has been a big one, a very busy day for me. In fact, the whole week has been ungodly busy. I hope you've enjoyed the stuff that I've made. If you missed the large discussion on free-to-play, there'll be a link to that as well. Thanks so much, guys. It's been pretty cool to geek out with you over this week. Hopefully a lot more good stuff to come. I'll catch you next time.